Each week, I'm joined by a top country star who gives me a hand counting down the hits. Along this week is Chris Stapleton. How are you?
I'm great, Lon. How you doing?
Good, really good. You survived this past year pretty well, I take it?
Yeah, we've come out of it relatively unscathed, I would say.
So tell me what the last year has been like at home, without touring, with 5 kids, including 3 that are pretty little, if I recall.
Yeah, I have 3 under 3. So it's been a lot of diapers, a lot of diaper changing, a lot of herding cats. You know, it's my brother always warned me. My brother has 4 children, and he said, you know, once you get past, you know, the one-on-one thing, you're playing zone defense, and so we've been playing a lot of zone defense, and it's been wonderful though. It's the first time in my career as a dad where I've gotten to be around my children so much, and I've gotten to know my children even better than I ever could have hoped in this time. That's the silver lining in all this for me is getting that.
Well, there's so much to talk about with you here as we get along because in November you released your 4th album, Starting Over, and I want to talk a lot about that as we get along in the songs, of course, and features the top 10 title cut, Starting Over. We'll talk about that a couple times. Of course, it's, as we mentioned, the title cut of your latest album that was released in November. This one was a little different for you, and maybe we'll start here in terms of just the amount of time that you took to do this album, about 2 years. Yeah,
well, you know, and part of that wasn't by choice. I mean, I made the choice to shut down, certainly, but when we started the record in 2018, I don't know if it was a we or a me, decided I wanted to try something different, and go. We went to Hillbilly Central, which is Compass Records now they call it, but that's where Waylon recorded a lot of his records, and so we started there. We recorded some there, and then we went down to Muscle Shoals and recorded some in Muscle Shoals Sound, and but when we got to Muscle Shoals, it was one of those weird universe things where it was just like the power went off, like while we were recording, like in the whole town of Muscle Shoals, not just in the building, like the power in the whole town went off, like as if, and there wasn't like there was really a storm or anything that kind of prompted that. It just, there was something wrong with the grid. And so the mayor of Muscle Shoals was trying to help us and get, you know, divert power to us, and just, you know, which was a little embarrassing, but also I appreciated the effort. And but we, you know, it just felt like there was this universe thing telling us that, you know, you're not supposed to finish right now. This is not what you're supposed to be doing. Shut it down. And so I, you know, went back to the hotel room and I had that discussion with my wife, and she's like, you know, if you feel like shutting it down, and let's shut it down. We'll go tour for a year and reconvene in a year. And that's what we did. And in that year, we, you know, a few more songs showed up that are on the record that certainly make the record a different piece than it would have been had we, you know, crossed the finish line in 2018. So it's, you know, those things sometimes, when they're frustrating, as it was in 2018, it's hard to see that there's a purpose for it, you know. But there was a purpose for it. The purpose was for these other songs to develop and emerge and become whatever the record is now. And I feel like the record's exactly what it was supposed to be and took exactly as long as it was supposed to take, much to the dismay of my label, I'm sure, who was expecting a record a year earlier.
I'm sure.
But, you know, I think it all worked out. It all worked out.
What's fascinating to me is if you start the album in 2018 and then kind of you choose to put it on hold for a year or so and then come back, and then all of a sudden in March of 2020, you're forced to put it on hold, something that you certainly didn't anticipate. You know what I mean? You kind of choose to shut down a little bit, and now when you're ready to go and chomping at the bit and even thinking you're going to get out there to tour, and I think you had one date before it was shut down, and then all of a sudden, so you know what I'm saying? You chose to shut it down, and then you're getting going, and then something else chooses to shut you down. the irony there is just amazing to me.
Well, I just let you know that we don't get a lot of choices sometimes.
Well, that's
sometimes
true, yeah.
Even when we think we're choosing, some things choose us. And that's I think that's a good thing to remember when you feel like you need to control things. But we hadn't really planned. I don't think the release date for the record really changed based on the pandemic. We had planned on touring, and it shut that down.
Yeah.
But it thankfully, in the weirdest way, it gave us time to figure out how we were going to promote a record in the middle of the pandemic.
Did any songs either written after things shut down or came to you after the shutdown made it on this album?
No, the whole record was done and in the can and mixed previous to the shutdown, previous to the pandemic.
Okay.
The only thing that happened after the pandemic was the naming of the album and the artwork, and those things very much probably reflect pandemic times. The cover is just my wife typing lines on a white piece of paper and me writing the title on it. So that's because we weren't going anywhere. And that's we didn't have as much understanding as we have now, or as much options for treatment and all those kind of things for COVID. So, and then the naming of the album, Starting Over was sequenced as the first song on the record at that point, I think, but we hadn't named the record. And when all this stuff was kind of emerging, that was changing our lives, all of our lives in so many ways, I think it seemed appropriate to call the record Starting Over, because for some of us very large ways, and then for some of us even the smallest way, we were all going to have to do some version of Starting Over. And so I think maybe it was an appropriate title for an album in that way.
Yeah, and it's like so many songs these days that kind of take on a second meaning or a changed meaning after the pandemic.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I haven't gotten to fully experience what that is for people, because
Right.
I get to see that when I go play live, and see it on the faces
Right.
of people, and see
Right.
people sing words, and certain lines might mean more to other people than other lines. And I get to see that happen in real time when I play songs for people. But none of this record has gotten to live that way, and that's the only time it will ever really get live. I mean, I hope it's been listened to in people's homes, but that's when I get to see it, is when that happens. I get to see that it meant something to somebody.
Right.
Given
your, I guess, love of music and musicality, I will assume, or made the assumption here, that you are still very much an album kind of guy. You know what I'm saying? That an album as a body of work that kind of reflects a moment in time. And I always love to look at the first song and the last song, because people take great care, artists take great care in the sequencing of the songs on an album. And these two are so incredibly impactful as a pair, Starting Over and then Nashville, Tennessee.
Yeah. Do you want me to speak to that? I'm very much.
I was just kind of making that up, so I wasn't sure where I was going to go with the question. But they're just so impactful because they're like perfect bookends, if you will, for the music that's in between.
But as I hear you listen, and as I hear you say that, and I've never really, while I do very much confess that I love the album as a body of work and prefer that music be consumed that way, I've never thought of those two songs, tried to parallel them, and they are very much, one is hopeful and maybe one's not,
Well, and very much that's where I was going, because I got to tell you, I mean, Starting Over is that there's a freshness to Starting Over, and it is just Starting Over. It gives that hope, just like on January 1st, we all kind of start over with a new year, and there's that excitement. But I got to tell you, as somebody that's lived in Nashville for 35 years now, I guess, your song Nashville, Tennessee hurts. There's pain there.
Well, I mean, I wrote it. It was maybe it was born out of a little bit of a pain or a grieving anyway over some certain things that, I wrote that song kind of in the kind of the storm of life-changing events that came, and most of them positive, when we kind of had our moment in 2015 on the CMAs, you know, overnight, literally, even though I've been in town for, I don't know, you know, 13 or 14 years at that point, 15 years, something like that. Overnight, our lives were very different. And, you know, the tour bus was coming by twice a day, you know, so we rented a house down the road to kind of manage, you know, a loss of privacy that I, as a grown man, was not used to. And
Right.
And then all the while, you know, and you've been up and down Music Row, I'm sure. You know, the building where I met my wife on Music Row was torn down. The publishing company where I wrote the majority of the songs in my catalog was torn down. The first studio that I ever witnessed a record being made, which was Guy Clark the Dark, was torn down, and all those things in the name of progress and for bigger and better buildings to do bigger and better things, I suppose. But it very much, I was grieving those things in some ways in this song, and we wound up moving south of town. We don't live in Nashville proper anymore. We live, you know, 45 minutes south of town. But it was a weird thing for me because so much of my identity at that point in my adult life was very much wrapped up in this town and some of these buildings that I'm talking about, you know.
Yeah.
And it was, I felt displaced, and that song was born out of that displacement, I think.
Well, I'll admit, too, that there's a line in the song, so you be you and I'll be me, so long, Nashville, Tennessee. And I have to admit, on the first listen or two, I thought you were leaving Nashville. And then I realized at some point that no, it's Nashville has left you.
Well, I don't know that anybody left anybody. Everybody changes and grows, you know. And
Well,
I think that's what the song is, you know, for me.
Yeah, but that's kind of the pain, I think, and the hurt that I felt listening to it was just that, you know, Music Row was a special place. It was so full of dreams and creativity and that, and now it is, like you said, the victim of progress to a degree. But really, I thought that, oh my gosh, is you know, Chris leaving Nashville, and then it does feel like the city is that we knew that at least the music community is kind of, at least the buildings were part of it have kind of left us. Anyway, that's kind of a realization for me. Like, oh no, it's kind of, Nashville is what we came to know as Nashville when we had the dreams and came. The only thing that hasn't changed is there's still a million bars.
Well, that's true. Well, that's true. But I also want to point out, I think that if there is hope in that song, and maybe I don't list it lyrically in the song, but I in retrospect, talking about it now, while those things may not exist for me in that, you know, kind of being deep in the world of songwriting and very much a fixture on running up and down the buildings in Music Row, it does exist for somebody else, you know. It still exists. It just, I'm not in it like I was. And I think that song is grieving that a little bit too. But I think that's very natural and very, that's just life. You know, I think that could be true of any business, or whether you're a car salesman or you know, there's always you know, your kind of gang of working partners, and then there's a younger generation gang coming in, you know, and you don't understand what they do, and they maybe don't understand what you do, but there can be mutual respect in that, and then sometimes maybe you find, you know, a lot of the guys that I wrote songs with coming into town, I looked for the guys who'd been around a long time. You know, I wrote songs with guys who'd been around, you know, for 30 years. Those were the guys I wanted to learn from, you know, Guy Clark and Mike Henderson and Kevin Welch and you know, and also guys who were, you know, kind of veteran hit makers, Jeff Steele and Craig Wiseman, and these are a lot of guys that, you know, for no reason other than they just were kind, were willing to sit down in a room with me and let me learn.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and in that vein, I'd love to sing Al Anderson's name on a song with you.
Well, I should have mentioned Al in that list. You know, that was the list. You know, yeah, me too. I always loved. He's one of the guys I've probably written next to Mike Henderson as many songs with Al as I have with anybody. And Al Anderson and Mike Henderson are, you know, as far as guitar players go too, not just songwriters. guys that I very much have in my head when I'm trying to do something. I do a very, poor version of something I think that they would do. But I have so much respect for those guys, and I always want them to be a part because they have informed so much of what I do. It's always nice to me when they can be actual parts of things that I'm doing. So I love that. I love it.
Of the 14 songs on these albums, you had a hand in writing 11. Interesting choice for the other 3. A couple of Guy Clark songs and a John Fogerty song.
Yeah,
where did you see these? Where did you see those cuts fitting in with things you had written?
I don't know. I don't know the answer.
Fair enough.
The old friends, my wife and I have written, Guy's passed on now, but we wrote songs with him and looked to him very much, I think, philosophically on, ways to approach things sometimes in music and in life, because he was such a wonderful spirit animal in that way. He was only music. Like that was the main concern, and the song was the main concern. And all the other stuff was just kind of white noise to him. It was just, and so it was easy. It's easy to get caught up in other things, the business part of the music business, or the scheming and planning to try to make something successful. When ultimately, if you don't create something worthwhile, you've made all those other things exponentially harder, and maybe not really worthwhile. So, So I think doing these Guy Clark songs was in part a remembrance of him and paying tribute to him. What a great friend and an influence he was on myself and my wife. And we miss him, and we miss the sound of his voice and the songs that he, would undoubtedly still be writing if he were here today. Because that was what he did every day. He thought about songs, or he thought about making art, painting. He was an artist in all respects. And then the John Fogerty song is a song that I've loved for many years. I used to drive around. That was all off of I think it was in the 90s that the record that was on came out. I don't know what kind of success that song had at that time. I found its way to me because I bought a John Fogerty record as and I just gravitated to that song, and I always loved it, and I thought it was a beautifully written, and the sentiment was so simple and gorgeous. And I don't mean something being simple is not an insult to me anyway. In fact, it's the highest compliment to a songwriter. I think if you can convey something with simplicity that is impactful and powerful, then that's the best use of. You've done the highest level of songwriting in my mind is to get that point so clearly across. And it was just a beautiful love song, and I always love to play it. It's a song I always sit around and love to play. That's what a lot of covers are for me when they wind up on records. They're just songs that I've always sat around and played. I should record them because I love the songs. Millionaire was that for me. The last thing I needed, the first thing this morning that we covered on a record, but that was that for me. Was it 26? Was that for me? It was all those covers are just songs that I have loved and have loved for many years, and in Guy's case, not only loving the songs but also knowing the man, and I think those things are always important to do. I don't have any ego that I'm in any way, shape, or form the greatest songwriter in the world, and I should only record the songs that I write because that's the best thing to do. I think it would be a real shame to not record other great songs just because I didn't write them. Right. If Willie Nelson can record other people's songs, I can record other people's songs. That's kind of the way I see it.
Right. There's ones I was going to ask of the songs that you did have a hand in writing. Is there a song or songs that you could talk about that when you were done you go, yes, I said everything in here as perfectly as I could ever say it. I got across the point that I wanted to make, or the sentiment that I wanted to give. So I guess I'm just looking for your favorite kid here.
My favorite kid on the record?
Yeah.
Oh, well, I can't judge it just by the song to have a favorite song on the record. There's also because these songs, how they came together are all kind of wrapped up in the moments that they happened or the moments that they got finished and what was going through my head and feeling.
Yeah.
And then the actual final thing, for me,
Yeah.
Cold on the record is my
man.
favorite thing. And the reason is that was the song, that was the last thing we tried to do in Muscle Shoals. And what the basis of the track and the guitar solo, not the strings and the keys part, but that was all Muscle Shoals. And the guitar solo was just a placeholder that and there's frustration in it. You can hear it if you listen for it. There's frustration in that because it was, I didn't feel like anything was happening in my mind. That's where I was at in my mind. And so we got a year later and I said, man, I've been hearing strings on this thing. I want to put strings on this thing. I've never put strings on anything in my life, other than what we did an Elton John cover one time, and we for an Elton John tribute record, and we put strings on that. But for my own recording, record purposes, we've never done that. And so we did it, and man, it jumped up a notch. And Ben Montench came in and actually he put the keys on first, and that jumped it up a notch. And then we had this string part that Dave and I had kind of hummed to our string section leader for her to sort out the ways that it should go. And but then she played off of some of what Benmont did, and this thing kind of evolved over this 2-year period. And the reward is what is now there, and it's the longest span of time that I've ever in my recording career worked on something like that. And to me, when I listen to it, I think it's powerful just as a piece. But when I hear it, I hear the time that went into it, or the thought,
Right.
or the frustration that went into it, that led to the eventual triumph of finishing it. And that if there's a song that kind of encompasses the record, it would have to be that one, because it was there and being worked on in some form for the entire working on of the record. And so that's what I hear when I hear that song. And I love it so much that we were able to cross the finish line on it, because normally if I can't get something in a day, I have a very short attention span. I'm just like, I give up. We'll maybe next record, But we didn't give up on that
It's
one.
just-
And I
it-
think it was worth it.
Yeah, all that's fascinating to me, just because you can feel the pain in this of a relationship breakup, and it's so kind of not the song you'd expect from you, because for as long as you've been happily married, it is cold, and
Yeah,
some of
well-
the lines like why you got to go and cut me like a knife and put our love on ice.
I don't know. And this, once again, this is a song that was born out of music. And even better, more reasons I love this song. This is a song that my bass player and my drummer and Dave Cobb was out playing guitar, and those three guys, we always have a jam room set up backstage, to warm up before we go on stage. And Dave had come out with us for the year with the intent of maybe we'll write a song. Well, we didn't get any songs written except for this one. This is the only song, and this is the song that came out of a year of thinking that we would write a song on the road to go on an album. So that groove, that song came from that groove, and so the lyrics and the feelings came from the music, and they didn't necessarily start with an idea. I started singing that chorus over top of what they were playing because it seemed proper, and then we wound up recording it in Muscle Shoals because it seemed proper. And all these things kind of swirled around until it became this thing. And it's, I have a very special place in my heart for that recording and that song, just because I know it took, it was a very slow but deliberate act of finishing.
Right. Right.
And I love it for that.
Current top 10 is starting over from the album of the same name. Best luck with that. As always, man, thanks for the time. I always love talking music with you, and thanks for helping me count down the hits.
Yeah, man, real pleasure. And take care, Lon, and don't drive too fast in that Corvette.
Country Countdown.